Hi, I hope everybody's doing well and that you got through the eclipse season well. This is the first day after the eclipse, and it's also the first day of the equinox, the autumn or spring, wherever you are. And I thought I would just pop in. And I thought I would talk about what we could be looking at for the rest of the year because you don't really have to look very far to see that the world is changing quite a bit. I did expect all this to happen, and I did expect that we would have a huge beginning for the fall that would set us up for, I guess you could say, the transition into 2027. And we do see that happening. Now, with Pluto in gate 60 for the last time before it moves on in December, that definitely set the stage. And now moving into a couple days from now, on the 25th of September, we have Saturn moving back into gate 36. And this is, I believe, very karmic in nature, this transit. And I think it's going to change a lot of things, or if anything, bring a lot of the stuff that has been done with very little concern about consequences, things that have been started, initiated, cycles that have begun, bring it to the surface. And I guess we could see what has been beneath all the illusion that Neptune brought with it when it was moving through Gate 36. So if you look at Neptune moving through Gate 36 for such a long time, it was veiling what it was doing beneath the surface. And what it was doing beneath the surface is something that we will find out as the years go by. It takes time. But I feel like Saturn's going to do a little digging because Saturn wants to make us all responsible for the choices we make, the cycles we've decided to begin. And that will probably be something that will show up worldwide and maybe even personally. And I think that when we're talking about karma, I look at karma as a global event. I think it's something that, of course, we can always talk about in a personal way, but I think in this case, I would look at it as a global event, global things happening. And there are a lot of global things happening. And then you add in that we are in the final stages of the first line of the cross of planning, and we're in the first line, and you see a lot of it happening. And as I think I've mentioned before, we do see that the cross of the sleeping phoenix and maybe even cross of penetration are also sort of mingling with the final lines of the cross of planning and the cross of Maya. And it's kind of, I guess you could say, making this mutative force that's within in the collective. So, for instance, when I talk about that, I'm saying, for instance, if you look at the cross of the sleeping phoenix, we have the gate 34, 20, also 55 and 59. And so if you look at the first line of all those energies, if you just kind of study those first lines just to look at them, you will probably see that a lot of these themes are playing out in the world stage. 34 line 1, the bully. Knowing you have the power and using it to your advantage. Have we seen that in the world stage? I would say absolutely. 59 line 1 called preemptive strike. So we do see a lot of that. Have we noticed that there are a lot of, unfortunately, there's a lot of conflicts going on. We have a lot of strikes, a lot of this back and forth kind of energy for conflict and not being able to slow it down. And having said that, with Saturn moving into gate 36, this potentially could bring us into some sort of a culmination. Something is going to show up, I think, to have some level of a turning point because this is sort of the end of the big planets, or, I say big planets, what I mean slow moving planets moving through gate 36. And again, it's going to potentially put a ribbon on it all and move on. And Saturn won't move out of there until January. So this is basically the long haul. So there's a lot of things happening. And when we look at again the new cycles that we're going into, like 55 line 1, and this is an interesting line in that it's building a foundation of making alliances with powerful people so that you can express your spirit. Have we seen that? Well, yes. This is where we see people potentially giving up their authenticity to be part of the, you could say, in crowd or part of the crowd that is the on the winning side. And this is something that we see as well. And finally, we have gate 20 line 1, and that's called superficiality. And I do like this line. I do like it because what I see from this line is that even if it looks as though we're not actually looking at what's happening, a lot of people see what's happening. It's just that they're quietly watching, formulating a plan, waiting to see what exactly all the details are, all the parts to the puzzle. And so people are doing that. They're collecting all the data to understand where they're going to move in the future. Now, all of this is the point of which we've been preparing for. Um, because we know that the media has been skewed, even the legacy media has been completely skewed. And I know I'm sounding conspiratorial, but it's pretty easy to see that a lot of the media have become very one-sided, and it doesn't matter which side. It's right or left, it's going to be a side, and people are picking them. I'm not really much for any channel that is one-sided. It bothers me. So I have probably eliminated a lot of that. We do have independent media, but even those media outlets are beginning to become quite skewed because it's all about money. And that is the cross of planning and action. It's all about money. It is about the politics that require money to continue to make the engine run. If you look at all politics come from logical energy. Logical energy is it's the only circuit in the whole body graph that doesn't have a motor. In that way, they're always depleted for energy. They do have a motor, you could say, yes, there is the root. Or more specifically, they all have a manifesting channel, and that's how I should really say it more than a motor. Abstract has a 3536, and individual energy has two manifesting channels, which means that it's quite important energy and needs all the energy to bring mutation into the world, and that's the 3420 and also the 1222. And then we also have tribal energy, the 4521, which is also a manifesting channel. So we look at those four manifesting channels, and logic just doesn't have it. And so this is what we see with politics and the energy. My feeling is that the future may be very different for politics because I don't think there's really much more that they can do because politics just don't seem to do much of anything beneficial for the population anymore. In fact, they're just divisive. So if you stuck with me this far, let's actually talk about what I wanted to bring up, and that is basically the couple of things until the end of the year that are kind of on my radar of something to watch out for. First of all, we have, as I said, Saturn moving back into gate 36. That's a big one. Then we also still have Pluto in gate 60. On November 3rd, we're going to have the nodes finally change. They'll be moving out of 47 and 22, and they're going to be moving to 63, 64. And it's going to be a very short period of time, but I think it will be an impactful period of time because we know that as soon as we have two head gates activated, that's going to bring a lot of pressure to figure things out. So this is when people are going to really push for answers, really push for solutions, and really push for something more than just lip service. And this is when I think that a lot of conspiracy theories, and not every conspiracy theory is not based in validity. A lot of them are based in validity, and later on they show up to be. But then, of course, there are a lot that are kind of down a different pipeline. But ultimately, this will be potentially a time where we will see a lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of people feeling pressure to figure things out, a lot of people being nervous, a lot of people having anxiety, because even though 64 and 63 are not actually ajna gates, they don't bring anxiety, they do fuel anxiety. And so anybody who has gate 47 or gate 4 will be looking for some solutions. They'll be looking for some meaning. Why is this all happening? Why are we dealing with this? And if those answers aren't forthcoming, then that is when things are going to get a little bit more dodgy, you could say. The other perspective is that from the conspiracy theory perspective, it will be easy for people to really get dialed into conspiracy theories. And I think that anything that's been sort of in the airwaves lately, and you will know what that is, will take a big surge in interest, and that people will say, we want the information, we want things released, we want all the information released that hasn't been released. So that I see as being a big potential. And I do feel that that is when a lot of things will start to come together and people will start to see cracks in the foundation that things are not as people have said they are. And there could be, because of the pressure to figure out the answers, there could be this concept of, yes, we know something is off, but then there's also the idea that they could overblow it and make it into something bigger than it is. Not saying that it's not big, but saying it's even worse and worse and worse. Right now, we're I find an illusory phase where people are basically just glossing over the truth. And I think that leaders, basically, I don't think the regular people are glossing over the truth. I think they're living through life and seeing the realities of the choices that leaders have made for their lives. But that is, again, one more thing that we may see as the nodes move in. Now, the other thing is that the nodes will move again, and this is going to happen on December 23rd. This is the last nodal shift of the 2025, which is a big one. 3740 channel is a pretty big channel to have for the nodes. Now, there's a lot of things to talk about with that, but I won't get deep into it because I'm going to make a full video about it. But I will sort of just talk about it for a second. Now, this nodal shift is going to be in play from December 23rd to May 13th, thereabouts, May 13th, 2026. Now, this is bringing tribal energy. Now, I would say that this is basically if you're looking at conflict or anything about breaking promises, bargains made, contracts, all those types of things. This is the energy that we're going to see in the background. This is energy that started, that was in play with both world wars. Yeah, I'm not definitely not saying that's going to happen, but what I am saying is that it is very impactful energy. It is something to watch out for. Now, if from a personal perspective, if you do not have a defined will center, it is something to really watch out because it might be very easy for you to overdo it and just go beyond your capabilities and end up getting sick. And that's pretty easy to do with the will center, especially if you have any dormant gates or gates that are going to be turned on as soon as you would get a will center activation. So that is something to keep in mind. It is also a time that if you want to sort of set your mind on something, you might have access to willpower for several months. So that might help you to sort of get something in a routine. Again, always with a careful perspective of taking care of yourself and not being put in a position where you're overdoing it. Because again, it's very easy to do with the will center. I find that one of my biggest stumbling blocks is will center activation because I do have two dormant gates on the will center that will get activated if I have a defined will center. So that's something to keep in mind. But on the world stage, this could be a big deal. And the reason why it's even more of a big deal is because we're looking at the cross of planning. And we're basically, months at this point out before it switches over February 15th, 2027, if you align with that theory. And this is the sort of the last nodal background that we're going to have of the 3740 until after the sleeping phoenix. And again, this won't be again for 9 years because these cycles go about every 9 years, they reverse. And this is something that it's like almost like the last hurrah of the cross of planning before it moves out. And of course, it's going to ratchet up potentially all the fears that we have been inundated with. And, with fears, it's always about two different ways of dealing with it. One is through communalism, and the other one is through separatism. So there we have the people who are prepping and deciding that they're going to go off the grid. A lot of billionaires, in fact, are doing this. They're building all their billionaire bunkers. Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and more are doing that. And we also have people getting in communities. And this is where you see the rise of influencers who are basically telling the world that they know all the answers. And of course, there will be people who are tribal people who will want to align with that. But we know that that's not going to be um, viable. There are no answers. The only answer is from within us, our own selves. And so these are the types of things that we might see. So the tribalism, of course, with it activating even more, especially going into early 2026, we could potentially see a lot happening with the this concept of factions. But then there's also the perspective of you have the individuality kind of slipping in through the cracks, and suddenly we have this perspective of potentially starting to see the other side of the coin, starting to see that maybe somebody isn't your enemy as much as you believe they were, starting to see the difference. And there was somebody who I watch and they talk about, they were talking about a comment and they were just saying that they used to watch just legacy media on TV and then they started watching something that, like independent media. And they suddenly realized that a lot of the legacy media was so biased. They hadn't realized it. They had been in sort of that vault, that echo chamber. And when they sort of broke out of it, they realized that there was a lot more to see than they had actually been seeing. So, a lot going on with that. And, again, it is about potentially just, getting in your own space, figuring it out for yourself. And it's always going to be about making your own decisions, deciding for yourself what's true, because that is what that's exactly what human design has been brought to us for, to be able to move through all the noise and to find the truth and to, align with it. And that's it. Without that truth, you're following all these paths that don't lead you to your best life and what's best for you. It leads to more and more money for people to, sell you something. And that's kind of what's happening now. It's all about money being taken for the so-called answers. But the answers are, you already have the answers. You don't need to pay for them. And so these are the things that I'm looking at going forward into 2026, and for the end of 2025. Of course, I will do more videos to expand on the topics that I've just talked about, but I wanted to just pop in and just say, hang in there. Things are they're going to be interesting, and that's okay, because as long as you're prepared and you can see everything for what it is, as opposed to getting swept away with the current, you'll be fine. We'll all be fine. And that is why we've been sort of working with trying to find our own authenticity, our own authority for all these years, because this is the point at which we're going to need it more than ever. And with that said, I hope you have a wonderful week ahead. And until next time, take care and bye for now.